First thing, Nancy had distributed rules, or same rules as last couple of years. And so you might look them over, and if anybody has any concerns, let me know. At this time, is there any bill introductions? Seeing none. At this time, I'd like to have staff introductions, and we'll have David Weiss, Office of the Reviser of Statutes. David?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Good morning, committee. Yes, my name is David Weiss. I am with Reviser Statutes Office, and staffing the committee. I've been staffing Ways and Means now for this being my 13th session. And one form or another, also with our office is Scott Abbott at the back table there. He'll be doing things as well. And of course, we are the bill drafters. So if you have bill requests or anything related to this committee, and of course, also when we get into the budget proviso time, if you need budget provisos, please see either Scott or myself, and we can help you in any other way. Thank you.
Thank you, David. Next, we'll have Amy Deckert, Legislative Research Department. Amy, welcome committee.
Good morning, Mr. Chairman. I am Amy Deckert, the Assistant Director for Fiscal Affairs. I want to indicate you have our assignment list for the fiscal analyst in front of you. It's on the blue paper. The front is by analyst, the back is by agency. So if you're looking for information on a particular agency, you can quickly reference that. I'm going to have everybody come up and introduce themselves this year and let you know which agencies they will be responsible for covering. This is my 21st session with the legislature, and I have the legislative branch agencies as my responsibility. Next up is Dylan.
Good morning, committee. My name is Dylan Deere. I'm a managing fiscal analyst. This will be my 14th session. This year, I will be presenting the budgets for the Department for Children and Families only. But I also am the coordinator for performance-based budgeting. So if you have any questions on PBB, give me a call. Thanks.
Thank you, Dylan.
Good morning, committee. My name is James Fisher. I'm the managing IT analyst. I'll be presenting the Office of Information Technology Services budget to you this year. In addition to that, I also staff House Energy, the Joint Committee on Information Technology, Joint Committee on Kansas Security, House Legislative Modernization, and I also staff Senate confirmations.
Thank you, James.
Good morning, Mr. Chair and members of the committee. My name is Sharday Kane. This is my third legislative session with Legislative Research. This year, I am responsible for the Kansas Department of Revenue, the Kansas Department of Commerce, the Board of Tax Appeals, and the Board of Pharmacy, and I look forward to working with all of you.
Thank you, Sharday.
Good morning, Chairman and Committee. My name is Martin DeBoer. This is my fourth session here with the KLRD and with the Legislature. This session, I'll have the Office of Administrative Hearings, the Board of Indigent Defense Services, the Lottery, Racing and Gaming, the Attorney General's Office, the Judicial Council, the Judicial Branch, the Board of Barbering, Board of Cosmetology, and I am the coordinator for the Expanded Lottery Act Revenues Fund, as well as a facilitator for the General Government Budget Committee.
Thank you, Martin.
Good morning, Mr. Chair, members of the committee. My name is Luke Drury, and this is my first session with Legislative Research. I will be presenting the Board of Veterinary Examiners, Citizens Utility Ratepayer Board, Kansas Department of Agriculture, the Dental Board, State Board of Mortuary Arts, Board of Examiners and Optometry, Department of Wildlife and Parks, Kansas Corporation Commission, the State Fair, and the Water Office. I'll also be the coordinator for the State Water Plan Fund, and I am also staffing House Water and House Agricultural and Natural Resources budget.
Thank you, Luke.
Good morning, Chair. Good morning, Committee. My name is Brianna Horton. This is my first legislative session, and I have the Board of Regents, Emporia State University, Fort Hays State, Kansas State University, Pittsburgh State University of Kansas, University of Kansas Medical Center, and Wichita State University, and I look forward to working with you all.
Thank you, Brianna.
Good morning, committee. My name is Dayton Lemunyon. This is my second session with KLRD. My agencies this session are the Kansas Department for Aging and Disability Services, the Kansas Neurological Institute, Parsons State Hospital and Training Center, Larned State Hospital, and Osawatomie State Hospital. Happy to answer any questions you might have during the session. Thanks.
Thank you, David.
Good morning. My name is Megan Leopold. This is my fourth session with KLRD. My budgets are Office of the Governor, KDHE Health, KDHE Environment, Board of Healing Arts, and Board of Nursing. I also coordinate the Children's Initiatives Fund. I facilitate Social Service Budget Committee, and I also support House appropriations.
Thank you, Megan.
Hello, my name is Jennifer Light. This is my first session with KLRD. This year I'll be presenting on the Kansas Insurance Department, Healthcare Stabilization Fund Board of Governors, Governmental Ethics Commission, Office of the Secretary of State, Commission on Veterans Affairs, Pooled Money Investment Board, Office of the State Treasurer, Office of the State Bank Commissioner, and the Kansas Department of Credit Unions.
Thank you, Jennifer.
Good morning, committee. Welcome back. It's good to see all of you. This is my name is Shirley Morrow, for those of you who don't know. This is my 13th session, and I have C-Post, Sentencing Commission, and the Department of Corrections and all the correctional facilities. So we're going to have a good session.
Thank you, Shirley.
Good morning, Chair. My name is Amanda Prosser. This is my very first session with KLRD, and I will be presenting budgets on the State Historical Society, the State Library, the Kansas State School for the Blind and for the Deaf, Kansas Guardianship Program, the Real Estate Appraisal Board, and the Real Estate Commission. Thank you.
Thank you, Amanda.
Good morning, Mr. Chairman, members of the committee. My name is Merle Riedel. I'm a senior fiscal analyst with Legislative Research. This is my fourth session. I am assigned the budgets for the Kansas Department of Transportation, the Kansas Bureau of Investigation, Kansas Highway Patrol, Emergency Medical Services Board, State Fire Marshal, and the Adjutant General's Department. I am also staff assigned to Senate Ways and Means Committee. I'm also assigned to Senate Transportation and the Joint Committee on Special Claims Against the State. So look forward to helping.
Thank you, Merle.
Good morning, committee. Nice to see you all again. My name is Stephen Wu. I am fiscal for Legislative Research, have the budgets for Department of Administration, CAPERS, and Department of Labor. So if you have any questions on those subject areas, feel free to reach out. Thanks.
Thank you, Stephen.
Hi, committee. My name is Molly Pratt. I'm a fellow with KLRD. I will be presenting the budgets for the Board of Accountancy, the Abstractors Board of Examiners, the Kansas Human Rights Commission, and the Board of Technical Professions. I am also staffing the House Veterans and Military Committee and the Senate Education Committee, as well as the Joint Committee on Special Claims Against the State.
Thank you, Molly.
Hello, my name is J.G. Scott. This is my 21st session with the legislature. And since we presented in appropriations, I have memorized my budget, the Department of Education. So if you have any questions, don't hesitate to give me a holler. Thank you.
Thank you. And your name again?
Yeah, it's J.G.
Thank you, JG. Committee, I'd also like to introduce interim that's working for me this year, Cecilia Talley. Cecilia? No. Okay, the next item we have on the agenda is an update on Capers. We'll have Alan Conroy, Executive Director of Capers. Alan, welcome committee.
Good morning, Mr. Chairman. Thank you for the invitation. Glad to be here. And after seeing all these distinguished staff you have in legislative research, as an alumni, I can say the staff's been upgraded a lot since I served in that capacity. So good for you. I'm going to spend just a few minutes giving an overview. We've shared some of this information, for example, in Senate committee, but we've changed it up a little bit and kind of moved through, just highlight some of the information. And so, as always, whenever the chair, it's appropriate to take questions, always certainly glad to do that. And also today, we have a trustee, Ernie Claudel, is here. If you have any hard questions, again, save those for him. He'll be glad to help out. So in your deck there, of course, we just had an opening page. Of course, you know, there's 3 retirement system, regular capers, police and fire, and judges serve a lot of Kansans, and we'll talk more about that, but about 1,500 employers. But it all comes down, it's really that very first sentence on page 2 where it's just Kansas is a fiduciary providing retirement, disability, and survivor benefits for our members and their beneficiaries. And so that's simple. When it's just to boil it all down, that's what Capers is about, and that's our mission, and we try to never lose sight of that. On page 3 then are just our current board of trustees, and of course the state treasurer, by virtue of that office, is a voting member of the Board of Trustees. And so since last session, now Treasurer Johnson will be a member of the Board of Trustees. All of the others remain the same, 4 appointed by the governor, 1 by the president of the Senate, 1 by the speaker, 2 are elected as well. So no changes there. On slide 4 are just the sort of the topics that Chairperson Billinger asked that I touch on, these 5 areas, and again, some will be at a pretty high level, but again, welcome questions at any time that's appropriate. But just talking about the funding status of Capers and that additional contribution last session, as you remember, is $1.1 billion with a B. Just a brief overview, remind you about the membership information, the investment experience. And again, I think I've made the comment, I wish I could kind of slide over that one based on our current investment experience, but in the broad picture, I think we're in pretty good shape. And then just mention some bills, some recommendations coming out of the Joint Committee. One was at the request of the Board of Trustees. And then just very briefly, just so give you a heads up, our pension administration system, it's time to update that, and we don't ever enter an IT upgrade without, I guess, a lot of fortitude that we're going to get it and we're going to get it done right, and with your help, of course. On slide 5, then, is just a quick review of annually by statute, our actuary has to do an actuarial evaluation. It's just kind of a quick snapshot. It's where we are as the last day of the calendar year. So this is the calendar year 2021 actuarial evaluation. It takes the actuary several months to do all the work that goes into it, and the board receives it in July of each year. So we got this most recent valuation and the funded ratio of Capers, and that's funded ratio, as you may remember, is just assets to liabilities. You certainly, if you're below 60%, then the red lights are flashing. You want to be, if you're in the 60 to 80%, still kind of a cautionary period. You want to watch the direction things are headed. And then you really want to be above 80% on your way to 100% funded. And of course, that's always the goal, to get to that magical 100% number, or certainly close to that. So this valuation, that funded ratio actually went down. In the previous valuation, we were at 72.5. It went down to 71.6, and hence the unfunded actuarial liability actually went up from about $8.5 billion with a B up to 9.8 billion, still with a B. But as you'll hear, the largest single factor that affected the funded ratio, increased that unfunded liability, was the board decision, and we'll talk more about that, but the board's decision to lower that assumed rate of return. It had been at 7.75% for a number of years, and the board decided to lower it to 7%. And even that, you might think, 0.75%, maybe not a big deal, but when you're looking at a base of about $25 billion, and then you're looking out 30 or 40 or 50 years, that 0.25% certainly makes a difference. And so that's what's factored into all those calculations as we look at. Calendar year 2021, though, was certainly a positive year in the market. Here in this calculation, it went up 16.1%. Plus, in this valuation, now 2 sessions ago, the legislature authorized pension obligation bonds of $500 million. And so those were all things that were positive that helped really in some ways offset that, lowering that assumed rate. On slide 6, then, you just, I guess the good news is, again, all the employers are contributing at the actuarially required rate, which is really key, perhaps maybe one of the most important things in terms of the funding support of CAPERS. And it's, so the actuary says what the employer should contribute at, and then does the actuary, is the employers able to do that? And unfortunately, for almost 25 years, as you go back a ways, the decision, for a variety of reasons, was to contribute by the employer, mainly the state, at less than the actuarially required rate. And so that difference, doesn't go away. It just rolls to the unfunded liability. We charge that assumed rate of return in effect, and it has to be paid later. And so there was 25 years of that, and that's still the largest single factor in terms of the size of the unfunded liability, is all those years of paying less than was required. But starting with the 2017 actuarial evaluation, in that one, which was really in that valuation, the state finally started paying exactly what was supposed to. In 2018 and 2019, there were some additional contributions made to CAPERS, which in total dollar-wise got us to where we needed to be in terms of employer contributions. So we're about 5 years now where the actuarial contribution amount has been satisfied one way or another. And so that's so key to long-term funding. And I know there was a lot of heavy lifting by policymakers, you and others before you, to make that decision, make that commitment between the pension obligation bonds, the additional funding, and paying that actuarially required rate is just really key to that long-term funding. And of course, this valuation, that last bullet point there on slide 6 is that again, the funding plan, the amortization, that unfunded actuarial liability is projected to continue to decrease each year, which is what you want. Again, assuming all the assumptions, full employer contributions, that assumed rate of return, and others. And so that's, again, directionally, it means CAPERS funding is on the right track. On slide 7, then, specifically to those additional contributions, you may remember it was $1.1 billion, and CAPERS received that over 4 different installments. It was $553 million last May, about $300 million June 1st, $146 August 1st, $125 million in December 1st. And certainly that was, just in terms of the volatility in the market, that turned out to be a very wise decision in terms of spreading that out, and it helped, given that extreme volatility, help minimize some of that market timing risk that we hear about sometimes. And so that worked out good. That first $253 million of the $1.1 billion, there were some missed payments going back to 2017 and 2019, and there was a payment plan set up pay that off over 20 years, and so those payments were being made. But this first $253 million of the $1.1 billion extinguished that liability, and so that obligation was paid. And then the balance, $870 million, went then to help improve the funded status of the system. And so, anyway, the additional funding lowered the state school employer contribution rate for 2025 as the timing works out by about 1.3%, which saves you then about $67 million a year going forward. And so that extra payments, of course, certainly help the funded status of KPERS, and it'll be reflected again in lower employer contribution rates going forward. On slide 8 then just kind of switches gears to membership, and you can see the pie chart there, over 152,000 members of KPERS, the school group, which is the largest, and just reminds you, of course, that the state pays the entire employer contribution rate for all local school employees as part of state aid education. And so you might be able to read that, but out of those 152,000 active members, 88,000 roughly are at the school group, not just a little under two-thirds. And we have active members from age 16 to age 90. And previously, I think I may have reported that previously our oldest active member was 92 and was a school employee. And we're not sure, I guess, as we always said, we don't collect position descriptions. We're pretty sure they weren't a bus driver. We thought maybe a para, but anyway, we know this person is 90 and works for a local school, or I'm sorry, local employer. So, and the membership's been pretty constant, a slight decline of about 1% during the calendar year, mainly on the state and local side, but in the grand scheme of things, pretty relatively flat over really the last decade. But again, KPERS, certainly in terms of the state's commitment, 70% of the active membership are state and school members. Again, the state's paying that, so it's $640 million a year in terms of those employer contributions. So a big part of the general fund budget, big commitment on part of the state to satisfy that obligation. And so that on slide 9 then just kind of breaks it down, kind of a busy chart, but it just shows you by age distribution. And this does it by the different groups, KPERS 1, 2, and 3. You may remember KPERS 1 is the oldest group, so you had to have membership before 2009. KPERS 2, basically a closed group, although correctional people can still belong to it or join it between 2009 and 2014. And then KPERS 3, which is still a defined benefit plan, but is that cash balance plan, a hybrid plan. So it has several attributes of like a 401k. And that's one of the notes in this valuation. The KPERS 3 group is now the largest group out of those 3 groups. So there's different pie charts, but KPERS 3, the largest group out of all those KPERS members. And on the age distribution, most KPERS members averages around about 10 years, between 10 and 11 years of service. KPERS average salary for those members is around $49,000 a year. On slide 10, then just switches gears to retirees, over 111,000. They're retirees age 50 up to 111. So again, as I say, something to shoot for. 111, be a good long life and do lots of good over that 111 years. Beneficiaries in range from 15 to 110. And I had Jared check the other day, and our longest retiree has been receiving a KPERS benefit now for 45 years. So I guess in terms of they may have retired early, longevity, but certainly I think reflects the value of a defined benefit plan, that guaranteed benefits there throughout their remaining life. Again, the average benefit KPERS is a little over 16,000, between 16 and 17,000, about 40,000 for police and fire, and about 47,000 for judges. And again, of all those 111,000, well, of the 111,000 retirees, 88% of them remain in Kansas. I mentioned the other day, next up is Missouri with about 4% of KPERS retirees, followed by Oklahoma, and then Texas, and then you might guess Florida and Arizona be the last in terms of the top five. And we do have 32 retirees that are that live overseas. So. 11 is just informational. This just take those just retirees only, not beneficiaries, but you can just see the numbers by county. So there's 91,000 actual members, and you can just see that across the state. And it's just the darker the blue means there's more KPERS retirees in that respective county. Slide 12 just takes that same information and then shows what's the average benefit with by county. Again, the darker the green, the higher the average benefit. And of course, some of them, as you get smaller numbers, you know, one person or a few people could certainly affect that average as that works in all areas. Slide 13 then just looks at investment experience. Again, over roughly half of all the money that comes to KPERS is from the investment experience. And so that's why certainly how the trust fund is doing certainly plays a big factor. About a little over a third from employer contributions and the balance from member contributions. And as you know, the way the defined benefit plan works, investment earnings are down. Guess who then over time makes up that shortfall? It's the employer contributions. It's the employer's contribution. The employers have that responsibility as a defined benefit plan. If there's ever anything that needs to be made up over time, it'll be reflected in those employer contributions. It doesn't have to be paid all at one time or anything like that, but over time through employer contributions. Of course, calendar year 2021, 16.1%, and life was good. Now it's calendar year 2022. Things have changed a lot, and it's indicated in that through the end of November. We're just on the vinyl closing out all the calendar year 2022 books, but at the end of November was a negative 7.4%. Those preliminary numbers for the calendar year, it's certainly going to be negative, maybe a little bit higher than that, maybe in that 9% range, but certainly a negative number. On a fiscal year basis, so at the end of last June, it was, for that fiscal year, it was a negative 4.77%. And you can see, you know, the annualized returns over time using the November 30th, so using that negative 7.4%. Well, I guess the trailing 1 year is negative 5.4, 3 years right at 6.9, 5 years 6.8, 10-year 8.2, and the 25-year 7.2%. Slide 14 then is perhaps maybe in terms of story to tell might be maybe certainly maybe if you can visually remember this one. It just shows the historical returns going back 25 years. And as you probably know for sure, maybe in your own finances, you know, as you look to 2001 and 2002, you look at 2008, 2009, and now 2022, the KPERS investment fund is no different than what was going on in the market. Some big down years in those, particularly those two recession areas. But as you look back over these 25 years, if you count them, we've had 5 years of negative. We've had 6 years positive, but less than that assumed rate. And for most of this, of course, would have been that 7.75%. And then we've had 14 years above that assumed rate of return. So, you know, market fluctuates a lot, and again, hard to predict what might happen, but at least, for example, in this chart, after some downturns, then the market takes off again once it works through that downward projection, or that downward results. And whether or not we go into recession or not certainly will impact, I think, when those positive numbers will come. Switching next gear, it's just talking about that investment return assumption. Again, that assumption is probably the biggest assumption. You know, what's going to be those returns based on the trust fund as our actuary does all those calculations. The Setting that rate was really, to set that assumed rate of return was delegated by the legislature back in 1998. So it was, and it's been 8% from 1986 to 2016. So about 30 years, it was at 8%. And then about 6 years ago, the board examined it and decided to lower it to the 7.75% from 8%. And of course, they had numerous meetings, studied it, heard from our experts, and they spent most of fiscal year 2022 studying that. Slide 16, just our general investment consultant, of course, had lowered his 10-year expected investment return. He was at 7.1% in 2019, down to 6% based on market conditions. Our actuary also recommended a reduction in that investment return based on the investment return outlook. And of course, lots of plans were lowering their assumed rate of return, and that final bullet there on the bottom of page 16 is, so we were at that point still at the 7.75, and that was the highest out of all the public pension plans in the country. 7.75 was the highest. And so on slide 17, based on all the information, the recommendations from our consultants, and a lot of study by the board, they did decide, of course, to lower that from 7.75 to 7%, and now we're right at the median of that public pension plans across the United States is 7%. As part of that change, they did slightly increase, I think, the amortization period, trying to stabilize employer contributions. So for the state school, they did add 6 years. You may remember the prior amortization period started in 1993, 40 years. It's supposed to be done in 2033. So this adds 6 years to it, and so be fully amortized over 2039. And you can see the information on the other plans, state, local, or local KPNF and judges. On slide 18 then, so the actuary used that new valuation, or that new assumed rate of return in the valuation of the results I just shared with you, the 2021. There's a good thing there in terms of, it's called actuarial smoothing, where they, rather than reflect all the earnings or the losses in a particular year, they spread it out over 5 years. And so we had, in this kind of actuarial reserve bank, we had positive investment performance from 19, 20, and 21. Of course, that $500 million in bonds that you all authorized. And so that certainly was all good things going to help offset the change in the assumed rate of return. But despite all that, the overall system funding did, as I say, did go down from that 72.5 down to 71.6. And so now, but CAPER still doesn't have negative amortizations as it calls. And so then that just means if all the contributions are made and the investment return is met, it's still assumed that that funded ratio, trying to get between 80 and 100%, is still increasing and still on target to extinguish the debt. And then the last, I guess, second to last item, just briefly, joint committees recommendations, and the Board of Trustees tries not to complicate your lives and bring a lot of bills over for you, but this is one request that the board did make, and it was presented to the joint committee. Joint committee did recommend an introduction of a bill, and that relates to, currently there's a statutory cap on alternative investments, particularly in the private equity area. That current statutory cap is it can't be any more than 15% of the portfolio, and it's been in place now for 10 years. It's not had a factor in terms of our ability and placement of funds, but with all the volatility, as the size of the trust fund changes, that drives up that percent that's in those alternative investments. And we're not exactly there yet, but it's certainly an area that the board is watching, and so Because if we get close to it, or of course we go over it, then we'd have to stop investing in those private equity type investments. They have a long investment queue, and there's lots of reasons we can talk about. But anyway, so Senate Bill 20, the Joint Committee did recommend it. It was referred to financial institutions and insurance, and the bill just, there's still a cap, but it allows the Board of Trustees to set the cap rather than have it in statute. And so it gives that flexibility, I think, on the investment side that the board is seeking the legislature's approval. Slide 20 just talks about another bill that the Joint Committee recommended, and that's a cost of living adjustment. And it would be for, right now, CAPERS, there's no permanent or automatic cost of living adjustment for retirees. It's ad hoc. The legislature has to grant it. CAPERS 3 members, so those newest members since 2015, there is an option for a self-funded COLA where they can take a lower lifetime benefit, and then they can select either a 1 or 2% annual COLA, and it's an actuarially reduced, or it's an actuarial calculation, so there's no cost to the employers, but the members pay it out of their anticipated lifetime benefits. This bill then would just add that same option that CAPERS 3 members have to CAPERS 1 and 2. And so, again, it's self-funded, just gives them another option when they're ready to take their benefit. How do they want to take it? Do they want perhaps a reduced benefit, but knowing that it will be increased for by either 1 or 2% over time? It only applies to new retirees, does not impact anybody that's already retired. And then the last item is the pension administration system. Does it get any better than this? The pension administration system at CAPERS, it's been over there. It's our software system. It's our system that we interact with all of our members, so active and retired, all of our 1,500 employers. Keeps all the data on members and service and contributions and all those things that go into a pension administration system, calculating benefits, service credit, all those kinds of things. Well, this system has been in place since 2005. So it's getting sort of long in the tooth, as they say. And there's, of course, been lots of changes in the plan design. CAPERS 2, CAPERS 3, working after retirement, drop. All these changes that has been approved for CAPERS for the system, then all those, of course, has to modify the software system to be able to accommodate those changes. So 2005, so we decided it was time to do a comprehensive needs assessment, which we consulted with or contracted with an outside firm to do that. And we were trying to decide, could the current system be upgraded, or did we need to, start with a new system? And initially, we hoped that maybe we could use the existing framework and upgrade kind of in place. Certainly cheaper, if it works, certainly less time, and then you don't run that risk of the big bang, as they say, of cutting over from your system. And our current system is working. I mean, we're paying benefits, we're collecting contributions, we're doing the things that we wanted to or we needed to do. It's just getting more and more cumbersome to maintain all that system. And so we had thought that maybe improving the existing system was viable. And then in the last several months, as we continued to work with our current vendor, they haven't necessarily met our expectations. The cost of improving in place have gone up, and now we're in the neighborhood of what a replacement cost. And so based on that, on slide 22, then we decided it was best, given the size of the project, to really go out and test the market. So we're starting that request for proposal process. And of course, we've been doing a lot of work. We've collected all the requirements. There's about 3,000 requirements that any new system would have to do. And we're trying to sort of stabilize or improve the current system too, knowing that A new system's probably 4 or 5 years down the road. And so we're trying to stabilize and at least, I guess, make sure our current system stays workable before if we do switch to a new vendor. And so I just want to give you a heads up on that. So we're starting down that process. And slide 23 then, of course, the legislature has been very supportive in our budget up to this point, and those estimates were based on really stabilizing and building on the current system. Of course, we'll see whether or not these dollars are on the mark or not once we get that RFP back, we hope by next fall. So next session, we'll be able to tell you for sure what that what the estimated cost is for that system. So, Mr. Chairman, I've tried to touch on those subjects of the $1.1 billion, how that's helped us, a little bit on membership, investment experience. I should have told you this January started off very positive. So the first year of the calendar year, 3 weeks in, we're looking pretty good. Now, whether or not that might change today or tomorrow, but at least we're headed the right direction after 3 weeks. So again, we'll see how that works. Recommendations of the Joint Committee and then the IT system. So,
Thank you, Alan. Couple of questions. So when the board changed the return of down to 7%, that added $1.34 billion on to the unfunded.
In total, it was $2.7 billion, I think is what, by that change.
2.7, okay, that's why I wanted to make sure what that number was. And how high did we get when we added the additional funding last year before the adjustments were made? How high did we get?
Upper 70s. I think we had hoped the projections were, had we not been negative now, whatever it turns out to be, but 9% negative. The hope was with the additional money and with let's say a strong investment year, we'd either breach that 80% or be knocking on the door. And I think the hope was we'd be able to breach that.
I thought the target was 80%. I just want to make sure on that. So now with the adjustment, we're down into 71.
Yes, 71, yep.
Right. Do you know how many people on this Tier 3 are taking advantage of the COLA option? Is there very many?
And we can get you the exact numbers. My impression is that it's pretty limited because, again, it's a self-funded COLA. And so, but anyway, and we'd be glad to provide the exact numbers, but I think it's limited, I'd say.
And how about the drop program? How many people do we have on the drop now?
I don't know, about I don't know, 60 or 70, I think. It's starting there's a lot more interest in that. And of course, some of the other employers are interested in whether or not it might be expanded to them or not. But because right now it's just KBI and Highway Patrol. And then, so they're up to 60, out of a relatively, between the two groups, I don't know, over 500-600 total being those between troopers and KBI agents. So
seems to be working in that.
Yes, absolutely.
That's why I was just wondering on that. And I'll take other questions. Senator McGinn.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Since Senator Billinger brought up the tiers, I'm trying to remember if I brought this up at caucus, the 2.5, getting rid of tier 3. I mean, can we get some numbers on that? Because I don't believe that 3 is very popular.
Yes, and I think we've been working with our actuary, and I can just tell you kind of ballpark. So this would be to move everybody currently in CAPERS 3 to CAPERS 2 into that group. So that benefit structure, a true full defined benefit plan. The costs in a couple different ways, but the upfront costs would probably be about $250 $15 million. And then annually, it would cost about $60 million a year in increased employer contributions. Then going forward, of course, as the payroll increases, that contribution would go up, but same with Capers 3. And so I mean, that's, I think, what the actuary would say, $217 million upfront, $60 million more starting out annually, and that would move everybody from 3 back to 2. And so they would, now their benefits would be just like Capers 2 in terms of retirement eligibility, a true defined benefit plan, not the hybrid kind of 401k cash balance plan as it's called.
We could do a compromise.
Yes, you could do, that's right. You could pick out which attributes, whether it's the retirement eligibility date or whatever you think is I guess the key factor, maybe particularly in terms of recruitment and retention that you think, so you could, like you say, have a 3.5 or a 2.5, Capers 2.5 or whatever it might be. Yes.
Okay. And then I'm sure when people sign up for Capers, you have, there is no COLA in 16-point font and bolded.
We pass that information along, yes. I mean,
I think legislators still don't understand that. And if you look at the history in the 80s and all the things that tanked this whole system, I mean, that was one. I mean, there were other mistakes made as well. And then finally, I think I just don't understand slide 17. At one time, I thought that the judges were way ahead of everybody else. I think maybe I'm not understanding what this is saying. So I thought the worst was, of course, the schools, as far as the amortization getting to where we needed to be. And then I see now, it must have been money that we have given that has changed all this, or can you help me understand why it appears that the judges look worse now than the schools and local government?
Right. Part of it is there's such a small group. There's only like, 200 and some, or I guess active maybe, and up to, even with retirees, they're probably less than about 500 membership in that. They are the strongest funded. I think they're over 90% funded. But again, with the change in that assumed rate of return, it impacted them and like it did the other systems. And so again, trying to make sure those employer contribution rates were workable, I guess that was one of the things that the board took into account and looked at. And so the way it worked out was increase their amortization period 9 years. And
I think that's what I got it mixed up with, is the fact that they're the strongest funded.
Mm-hmm.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Senator Fagg.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Alan, thank you for your presentation. When you look at slide 5, and it talks about that 71.6% for 12/31/2021, and then you look at slide 14, it talks about historical fiscal year returns. Down at the bottom, that says 2022. So technically, that 71.6 doesn't include the 47-point negative number. That's my question.
I'm sorry, I'm sorry. So slide 14, I'm sorry, and slide?
14 and slide 5.
5.
Slide 5 talks about 12/31/21. So that's where we was at that point. But the fiscal returns is shown 4.7 negative.
Yes, and the actuary uses that actuarial smoothing rate, and so it takes returns and blends them over a five-year period, and so there's an actuarial return and then there's a market return.
Okay, so is that 2022? Is that as of 12/31/2022? That 4.7 negative?
Yes. Well, that's fiscal year. That's right. So that, the big chart, this one is fiscal year, and then this one is talking, or on slide 5, is calendar year.
Oh, okay. So this is a fiscal year, okay, versus calendar.
Yep.
So my question, when we look at 12/31/22, are you guessing we'll be in the yellow? Where are you thinking we're going to be at the 12/31 because of all the factors?
Right. I don't think there'll be much change. Again, and that's because, and in fact, in the valuation, as part of, they do this sensitive analysis, they say if you look forward just 1 year and you hit the mark 7%, and you hit them, or if you have 0%, or if you had a negative 7%, and you assume all the other assumptions are met, then where do you end up? And it stays right around where we are now, and that's because of that actuarial reserve bank account that I sort of mentioned. So we have $2 billion positive in that account because we've had these good years. So in that actuarial reserve account of money to be reflected, it's not in the actuarial calculation, there's $2 billion of that smoothing money, again, taking good returns or bad returns, spreading it out over 5 years. And so, so just one down year doesn't really move the needle much, and particularly because of that actuarial reserve account where we have 3 very good years and then 1 negative year. And so this next valuation, the negative year, it's the oldest, it's going to drop off. Of course, it'll be replaced by presumably another negative year, but there's still 3 good years of very strong returns.
One more question.
Yes.
Thank you. On slide 16, when you're talking about your general investment consultant, lowered the 10-year expected investment return from 7 in 2019 to 6. And then the board decided to do 7. Right. What was the thought process on that?
It was right on the money and a lot of in-depth analysis. It was really, it's the investment horizon. The investment consultant really looks at the shorter term, probably no more than about 10 years, really 5 to 10 years. And of course, the actuary and the board is looking out a longer investment horizon. And so that gets us to that 30, 40, or 50-year horizon, and what we think over the long haul is a reasonable number.
So he was looking at 10 years and you're looking at 30, is that what you're saying?
Yeah, yes.
Thank you.
Senator Pittman.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you, Alan, for the presentation again. As I mentioned in the FI&I, you know, the rate was at 8% for 30 years, and we went down by 0.25%. And that was kind of a big move. And this year, we're going down by a whole another 0.75%. And I think it should have been at 7% from years and years ago, decades ago, because that is the average across the industry. But I can't overemphasize how big of an impact that has on how we approach our funding and how we approach this thing. We did a yeoman's work last year and over the last couple of years in terms of funding it. The chairman's advocated on the floor, and we put in up to that 79.5, and that's a hard number to see drop as a legislator, having done all that work. And so I mean, having such a big drop, I understand it had to happen, but just the timing having happened right now it's hard. And I'm just gonna put that back out to your board. Obviously, I think it needed to be done. And I'm just gonna make one other point is that, you know, when you look at the new system, we talked about it last year, I really hope as you look outside at other vendors that you're looking at the architectural kind of methods that some of the other agencies are going for. I know you're not bound by those things. You have your own IT. But looking at what they're doing in the unemployment, looking at their new system, and looking at some of those other architectural things that we might be able to synergize across the state, I really encourage your IT folks to take a look at that in conjunction with the CETO over in the administration. So anything you can do in there, I think it'd be great. Thank you.
Thank you, Senator.
Senator Petty.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Alan, on slide 7, that last bullet, the additional funding lowered the state school employees contribution rate for 2025 by 1.3. How is that 67 million? Where is that reflected at?
It would just be then, it's one of the factors that goes into calculating then the required annual actuarial required rate for the employers. So it does look at, look at this new money, look at investment earnings, looks at mortality, looks at, in terms of how long people are working, it's one of those things that goes into that. And we tried to isolate just that point, and that's what our actuary said, that by itself, had a positive $60 million impact.
And then on slide 17, you had, when the question was asked earlier from Senator McGinn, you mentioned that there was that the judges, that they were already 90% funded when they, what is KP&F? That they were in that range too.
They were, I think they're in the 70% range, if I can find that chart here. So they're currently at 73% police and fire.
And state employees are?
Would be in that, well, because it's a combined state school, state employees by themselves would be higher, but it's 71. 71. Yep.
Okay. So and then you had mentioned in your presentation, so are we still feeling, you said because the state has paid less for years in the laying contributions, that contributes to unfunded liability. So we're still recovering from that or not?
Yes, it's from, you're paying what you are. The last 5 years, policymakers, as indicated, done the heavy lifting, paid and you're paying what you're supposed to. So you're exactly, it's doing the appropriate thing in terms of actuarial funding. But it's those 25 years before 2017 where it was less. And so as the actuary calculates and assigns, what goes into that large unfunded actuarial liability, the largest single factor still is those 25 years of not contributing what was required, because again, that obligation then, it was shorted, and so it's been, from that very first underfunding, now it had been 30 years ago, so that's been shorted in the system, so interest on that in effect just compounds. Yeah.
Okay, my last question is, would a recession impact us highly in our CAPER system?
It certainly would, but I think that's one of the things of being a large institutional investor, again, roughly $25 billion, and we're spread out, and of course there's some statutory limitations, but we have about 25% in U.S. equities, so the stock market, about another 25% in international equities, but then that whole other side of bonds and government securities and real estate and private equity and on down that list. So we're a large institutional investor, and we're, I think, well diversified to try to weather a down recession when and if it comes.
Thank you.
Senator Alley.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you, Alan, for being here. And I'm going to piggyback on Senator Pittman for a little bit, but one of the things that I got to thinking about was we put a $500 million in as bond. Would we be better off paying that bond off, or would we been better off giving you the $500 million cash like we did last year?
Yeah. Well, of course, to CAPERS, I mean, we got the $500 million. The bonds were sold. You all are paying the debt service. The bonds, at least that $500 million, I mean, I think it was sold at 2.65%. So it's like, wow, I mean, yeah. So they were sold very cheap. So the debt service on that is, I guess, still still something, but at 2.65%. And of course, that's the whole premise of bonds, that over time, we can outproduce 2.65%. So the trust fund's stronger because we got the money right away, and then that'll be reflected in lower employer contributions. And so I guess we're glad to take contributions from bond proceeds or cash, like the 1.1 billion. Either way works for us.
So if somehow this body found another $500 million, would we be better off, and we wanted to put it into capers, would we be better off just giving you money like we did last year? Or would we be better off paying off that $500 million bond?
And of course, you've got some very good financial experts here in the room, but I'd say if you don't have to pay that debt service, just the cash transfer in effect, then it saves you paying whatever the rate might be, but let's say it's 2.65% again for 20 years. If you can, just a direct cash transfer saves you paying those obligations, that annual debt service.
Thank you.
So Alan, tell me if I'm looking at this right, but the unfunded liability is costing us 7%. The bond's costing us 2.5 for the arbitrage is where we're making a considerable dent. Senator Fagg.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. When you was talking about the 131 public pension plans that are tracked, and we were the highest at 7.75, so now we're down 7. You said we're in the middle of the road.
Yep.
When you look at the 131, are those a lot of Illinois' pension plans and California's pension plans? I wonder if you take some of those out of the picture and then see where we're really at. Is what
we could certainly do that. That's right. That would include all the statewide plans, and some, like Missouri, they have a plan just for state employees. They have a separate plan just for school teachers. And so that's how you get to the 131. But yes, we've got a listing of every state, and we could back out, I guess, the outliers on either end if you wanted to.
And you understand what I'm trying to say? What kind of picture do we have then?
Yeah, that's right. Yep.
Alan, tell me if this is correct, but I think it is. Over the last 25 years, our average return was 8%. So we've averaged 8% for the last 25 years, actual performance. And if you look at it 30 years, it's 8.5%. So lowering it to 7, it gets us in line with everyone else. But if you look at our track record, we've outperformed it to 7 or 7.75. One other final question, Alan. So we have about $26 billion total in the account?
Probably a little less than 25 billion today, but January's coming up, so maybe.
To get to 100% funded, we need another just shy of 10 billion.
Yes.
Any other final questions? Seeing none, thank you, Alan. Appreciate it, as always.
Thank you.
Committee, that's all we had for today. So with that, we're adjourned.